Welcome back to Progressive Soup. My name is David Stevenson. We're doing the second of our two shows during, we'll call it Pearl Harbor Week. Monday was Pearl Harbor Day, and today's Thursday, and we're doing the second half of our shows dealing with veterans issues, coming back from wars, whether they be from Vietnam or any of the wars since then, or even prior to them, because we still have a lot of Korean vets that are around. But I have with me Paul Kachevsky, who's an attorney that helps veterans with their VA claims. We have Michael Zacchea, who works with veterans in setting up small businesses and doing things that'll work well for them within the confines of their disabilities, and that they can be productive citizens again. And we know that's really all they're looking for is an opportunity to return to society, to have an opportunity to provide a service, provide work, and be compensated for that work. But gentlemen, we were talking briefly about some of the things that works, the types of jobs and the type of employment, the types of business ownership that best suit veterans when they return.
So I can tell you, 96 businesses that we've started, 25% are contracting businesses, in the ACE trades, architecture, construction, engineering, roofing, carpentering, plumbing, etc. And then another 25% are in IT.
Technology,
right. Yeah. Every year we have one or two who are starting some sort of physical fitness, a gym or something like that. Every year we have one or two are starting a homestead farm.
Yeah.
Every year we have one or two are starting some sort of like a trucking business, becoming independent trucker, contract trucker or something like that. And every year we have one or two are starting a non-profit, primarily advocacy for other veterans, usually centered around either homelessness or job training or workforce reentry.
Now, Paul, you work with veterans, it seems, that have not been successful generally in getting their life back to where it was prior to their service.
And I think that's partially a recognition thing, is that the worst thing about having a psychological issue is that it's trying to see the forest for all the trees. You yourself have a very difficult time identifying when you have a problem. Same thing with TBI. But if someone else sits down with you and they look at what your morphology is, and they sit there and they say, okay, this is what you're good at, this is what you should avoid. And a nice, honest assessment. I think most veterans who are coming back from service should get this, because, you can take two guys and put them in, the same situation, and one could have severe psychological problems from it, and one not at all. And it goes to the extent of how it affected them rather than what they were exposed to. And you could get two guys who have severe problems, and the severe problems result in very different symptoms. So if they get an honest assessment coming back, that could guide them to what they should be doing, because you can kind of sit there and say, look, if this guy has got a little bit of OCD, he's very talented with his hands, maybe he should go into the trades, engineer, architecture, construction.
Compulsive disorder, yeah.
Compulsive disorder. So long as he's not in a situation where there's time constraints on him, he'll probably be fine. If you start putting pressure on him, this will start activating his post-traumatic stress issues, and then you run into a very negative kind of a feedback loop, so to speak.
Taking a step back, how do we define, you said TBI, the traumatic brain injury. How do we define it, and is it easy to define? Is it difficult to define?
Traumatic brain injury is basically if you've ever had a concussion, you technically fall in the spectrum of a TBI. But again, some people have severe issues related to it, and some people not at all. It's basically, the definition of TBI would be is if you suffered a head injury where you had any period of either unconsciousness or lack of temporal awareness, which means you have a memory gap. You might be walking and talking, but you have no memory of what it was. I have a guy who 2 days, he doesn't know what happened to him. Or you basically, it's called an alternate awareness, where you may be aware of what's going on, but you're really not fully there. That would put you on the scale of TBI. And the VA, unfortunately, I have a case right now that's really problematic, is that they look to the head injury rather than the results of the head injury. So they're looking at it and says, well, how bad was your head injury? And even though the veteran falls on the scale for TBI, the doctor says, well, your head injury I don't feel was as bad as it should be, and even though you now have a TBI and there's no other possible causes of this, you don't have a TBI. And he didn't do any of the testing, so we have an issue with that. But it's one of those things where the testing for a TBI is very specific, it's very lengthy, it takes about 8 hours over 2 days if they do it properly. I find many veterans who they put a claim in for TBI and they're either never tested at all or they're not tested properly. And same thing goes to psychological conditions. You have a guy and he goes to a couple of public, what they call them, sessions with other veterans, and they sit down and talk a little bit. And some veterans, they cannot do that. It's too socially upsetting to them, or it brings back too many memories of their service. And they stop going, and then the VA says, well, you're not getting treatment, so you're not mentally disabled. And in fact, I had one guy who was a Vietnam vet, and they assigned him a Vietnamese psychiatrist at the VA, and he basically went one time, wouldn't talk to the guy, stopped going, and the VA argued that he didn't have a psychological condition because he really didn't talk to the shrink about it.
Right. And this is the catch-22 that they set up. So because you have post-traumatic stress or traumatic brain injury, and you're not going to your appointments or you forget your appointments, therefore you don't have it because you're not going. Mm-hmm. And you can't get out of it. So just about your point. So what happened with me is I had I was combat wounded. I was in the hospital, and I had a in-theater diagnosis of post-traumatic stress after Fallujah. Did not have a combat diagnosis of traumatic brain injury, even though I had a number of times where as a result of blasts I had lost consciousness or was bleeding from the nose or the ears, which is symptomatic, but documented. But at the time, they were not required to screen for traumatic brain injury. Now they are. Now we know so much more about traumatic brain injury now than we did then.
So there's a step in the right direction.
Yeah, and the DoD has new protocol, et cetera. But the VA, and I had all these symptoms, and the VA absolutely refused to give me an appointment with a neurologist, despite everything. Despite, I couldn't remember anything. I used to drive around for hours and hours and hours because I couldn't remember how to get home. I couldn't remember how to get to my unit. They would call me up and say, "Where are you?" I said, "I don't know where I am. Can you describe what's around you?" I don't know. We'll come get you. It was really nightmarish, and I really had no memory almost of the whole year that I was home. Almost a complete loss of a full year. But the VA not just put me up, but actively refused. And I completely believe that somewhere, if we do a FOIA, eventually we'll find some sort of document, some sort of policy document or agreement between the DoD and the VA to artificially suppress examinations and diagnoses of post-traumatic stress and traumatic brain injury, or to diagnose those things with pre-existing conditions, pre-existing personality disorders, etc.
It's probably worth mentioning that the Michael wears the dark glasses because of some of the injuries he sustained, and that
light sensitivity.
Light sensitivity that's from that.
From a practical standpoint, as an attorney, what I'm noticing is there's actually something called Special Monthly Compensation T, which is for traumatic brain injury, and that is if you meet the criteria for special monthly compensation and you have a traumatic brain injury, that puts you on a different pay scale. Since my personal impression is that the VA could not financially grant everyone with a disability at this point in time, they would bankrupt the United States. If they started granting T, which is a higher financial benefit, you would cause that to occur even quicker. So I think it's more of a financial issue, where if they find the VA is notorious. They don't look for a problem because they do not want to find it.
Right.
So they will. There's a number of, and I'm going to be very fair to the VA on this. You will find very good doctors at the VA. You will find very bad doctors at the VA, and you can tell by how they fill out the CMP exams. I've had doctors who they've talked to the veteran, they've examined the file, they give a good, honest assessment of what the veteran's conditions are, and the veteran either gets his benefits or not, but we feel happy with at least the exam he got. Then you'll get examinations where you could tell the guy spent 2 minutes tops marking up that piece of paper and sends it off. And I know I have one case where it's taken us 7 years to appeal a bad CMP exam the guy got in 2007. And, he had, that doctor basically said he was fine. She would normally have rated him as severe for PTSD, but because he'd been full-time employed for the last 20 years, she listed him as mild. Unfortunately, the vet had not been full-time employed for the last 20 years. In fact, most of the years that she listed him as full-time, his Social Security statement says he has 0 income. The doctor made a mistake, and that mistake is taking us, and he's gotten, I think, 3 or 4 CMPs since that have all listed him as severe. And he's still listed as slight for PTSD. We're pending the next decision. We're going to see how that turns out. I would be shocked if they don't give him the 70 this time around. But you get a bad CMP at the VA. I mean, you take seven years plus to fix.
And here's the point about this. So these neuropsych batteries. So what you do for traumatic brain
injury. A battery of tests?
Yes.
Okay.
And it's 2 4-hour tests, and they're quantifiable. This is not a subjective test.
Meaning that the results are very scientific and very...
Yes.
Correct.
The methodology is accurate and pinpoint.
Right. They're quantifiable. So it's not a subjective call on the doctor's part. Either the person is able to perform and fall within the statistical boundaries of where somebody who's functioning correctly should fall or not, and if they don't, but they could before they serve, then there's very clear indicator that they, and it's things like memory. So they have memory cards, and you have to read the memory card, and you have to say the word, and there's a bunch of memory tests that you have to do, and you're supposed to score a certain amount on that, and you shouldn't get any wrong, but if you do, and there's levels of that, and there's hand-eye coordination things that you have to do. And you shouldn't have any problems with that. But if you do, and it's timed so that it's quantifiable, and it's repetitive, so they have to keep doing it so that they develop a baseline and they basically grade your performance. And they do it over. So it's not just one time. It's not just the initial neuropsych battery. You go through more neuropsych batteries. So it's impossible to fake. It's impossible to tank the tests.
That's funny because I know veterans who've taken the test, and the way the test is designed is that if you're trying to tank the test, you'll fall off the scale that clearly you're fudging the data. But the way they do the test is it's like an escalating memory test or escalating psychological battery, where they give you a relatively brief test, and then they give you a different kind of test, and then you go back to a memory cognitive test, and then they give you another type of test. And then by the 3rd test of the day, if I'm understanding correctly, there's like a 350 question exam. And I've been told by several guys you walk out of there with a migraine.
Right, the global assessment of function.
Correct.
Right.
Well, actually, we can get into the GAF scores in a second, because that's actually something the VA did away with because attorneys were getting too good at identifying, like, if a veteran's got a GAF of 49, he's severe. That's what that means. The doctor may have not checked off all the boxes that say severe, but if it says 49, that's severe.
My first GAF was 25.
Oh, that's not good. Well, I don't know if they should let you out in public with that. But anyways,
there's proof that there is hope. There is light at the end of the tunnel.
Well, no, they did away with GAF scores. That now they don't want to, because too many attorneys were arguing that even if the doctor didn't check off the boxes, if you put a GAF score in, you could argue the GAF score because the GAF score had a meaning. The VA then did away with GAF scores. So now, if the doctor doesn't check off the box, they're just going to say, well, because it was too easy for an attorney to go back and say, guy gaffed at 54, that's moderate severe, give him the benefit of the doubt, he should be 70%. I got a guy, he gaffed at 54, they gave him slight PTSD. Now, they retested him, now he's severe. Now you have to argue back that first exam was inadequate because the guy gaffed at 54, and even if the doctor didn't check off the various boxes, 54 means 54, and there's actually a technical meaning associated with that. But once you do away with those numbers, there's nothing to quantify how bad the veteran is. And when you're trying to reopen for an earlier effective date, there is a burden upon the veteran to actually show that that he has continuity of symptomology and that he was as bad before. And without those numbers, it actually becomes a little difficult to go back and reopen a case for an earlier effective date for a proper rating. So that was my interpretation of GAF score.
Now back to the jobs that veterans, especially ones that find their way into starting their own small businesses, the jobs that seem to make more sense, carpentry, things of that nature, things that are precision jobs where you want people to be able to be on their own time schedule and getting things done properly. Because I guess in combat, it's precision is job one. You cannot make a mistake because making a mistake can be fatal.
It's like throwing a hand grenade. There's only 3 steps to it, but if you put them in the wrong order, it's going to be bad for you.
Yeah,
right.
So, are there any jobs that are, I won't say not appropriate, but maybe less appropriate for veterans to get into?
Well, I personally think any job that involves alcohol, being a bartender, I think that I don't believe that, especially combat veterans, especially in the first year, should be involved in alcohol at all. And 2, I know many veterans like weapons and like guns and want to start. I have people come to me and they want to open up a gun range, or they want to sell guns, or do firearms training. I don't think it's a good idea. I think that puts the veteran right back in a combat mindset. I know many veterans want to get back into the uniformed services as cops. I don't think that's a good idea either.
It seems like a reasonable thing to want to get back into because the uniform is part of the allure of being in the military.
Well, there's an interesting thing about post-traumatic stress is that when if your PTSD is not too bad, some people seek out that kind of adrenaline rush, and that's paramedics, police, fire, and they tend towards the uniformed services. And the problem with that is they're going for the same kind of adrenaline high that they got in the service. But to me, I agree with you that generally you're just going to aggravate your psychological issues going down the road, and if you're not getting help, that can really put you on a bad path.
Okay, so the types of things that do work well are the building trades. You mentioned other things that serve well with people that have OCD, a compulsive disorder, because they're precise. Yeah. Would a field like accounting or anything like that be precision?
Yeah, we have quite a few people who wind up doing accounting or finances.
You mentioned IT as being a 25%.
Sometimes people with traumatic brain injury have difficulty with some numbers, ordering numbers. So, but we do have, and I have had 3 people come through our program, 4 people have come through our program who've got into either accounting or financial services. So it's not, there's certainly that possibility.
So not surefire, it's a good possibility.
And my impression is that every veteran should come out, and I think we were talking about this during the break, is that they should be evaluated. A good, honest evaluation of what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are, and where they're falling on different psychological issues. Some people are going to be better off doing some things than others, and as long as you have a good idea where you should be going, the veteran could, if he's 30% or he gets his voc rehab, he could train himself towards that end and be a productive member of society after that. But as you said, sometimes the veteran's the worst person to tell you what they want to do because they say, "Oh, I want to become a police officer." If he's got severe PTSD, that's going to end badly. He's going to be put in a situation, and if it turns into a fight or flight, he may flash back, he may, have some sort of issue that could cause a unwanted escalation into an episode of violence that would not benefit anyone.
I have a friend, Melissa, that was in Gulf War I and suffered from cleaning off weaponry and the depleted uranium damaged her. And whenever you get a cold, she'll get pneumonia. But she told me, and it made sense at the time, and it sounds like you're reinforcing that, is that police work is it may seem at face value to be sort of similar to military, but there's a huge gap between what a police officer does and what a combat person does.
Absolutely.
There's police officers are designed are trained to diffuse situations rather than to react suddenly and instantaneously.
And there's a big difference. If you're a combat soldier and you're in a potential combat situation, you have fractions of a second to make a call. If you're a police officer, you may be in that same kind of a situation, but you may make the bad call. And the difference is that when you're overseas in a combat situation, it's viewed differently than when you're domestic.
Right.
So it's one of those things where, like I said, I'm not saying at all that all veterans should not become police officers, but I think that there should be an evaluation, a proper, honest evaluation to see that if you have certain kinds of issues, maybe police work is not for you. It's the same thing with fire, same thing with paramedic. I mean, you may have a situation where, I notice a lot of medics, combat medics, they want to become paramedics. To me, that may be a great fit, and sometimes it's not. It's just, you kind of have to see. So
I completely agree, and I completely agree about what it does is reinforces the neural connections that get made when you're in that you had when you were in combat. And to your point about the fight or flight, if your response in combat was to kill or to respond violently to kill a problem, if you're a cop and you're in North Hartford or you're in Bridgeport, and that's how you react, you might wind up with a situation like what you see in Chicago or Minnesota now, and it becomes national news. Aside from the tragedy of a unwarranted killing, I think it's an entirely different set of judgment, entirely different set of use of force that's called for.
And that is because of the advent of iPhones and everyone has their camera out now. It had been in the past where it was really the police officer's word, and if he said the other person pulled a gun or something, that would be. But now there's 40 videotapes of the situation occurring as it happens, and you'll have a police officer say something, and then the video comes out, and it becomes rather shocking to the public when you see a situation where it doesn't appear even reasonable why violence was used.
A little bit off topic, but do you think that having a camera everywhere, taking pictures of everything, do you think that'll help police officers carry out their duties more in the way that we would hope that they would?
I do. I think that the police, I think that's a very difficult job. I think police are under a very difficult situation for the most part. But I think that if they do have that kind of a situation going, there's been some really great videos come out of police officers doing their job properly. And I applaud all those officers, and I think, if you're out there and you're doing a great job, and I've actually seen people try and antagonize the police officers, and the police officers responding very appropriately, sometimes a little humorously, but very appropriately. And it's one of those things where, I think cameras can show how difficult the job is. On the flip side, sometimes it'll also show the darker side of some things that occur. So, I mean, there's a positive and a negative to it.
I think Americans have a very distinct fairness button that, and admittedly these are exceptions, but that these exceptions push that fairness button, and I think everybody reacts that way. And I think that the goal is always to try to figure out a way, almost like Lean Six Sigma it to the civilian police interaction, so that you can sort of reduce the number of interactions that wind up in the use of deadly force. On a nationwide basis. I mean, you think about the number of cops and you think about the number of interactions between cops and people, and it's probably in the millions on a daily basis, but, one or two
can have such a negative effect on public opinion.
Right.
So that's...
And yet at the same time, as we've gone towards having police officers in patrol cars rather than walking the beat, with actually being out there face-to-face contact with the public and getting to know people on a first-name basis and having that interaction and that hey, I'm a regular person, you're a regular person just because I'm a police officer and you're a citizen. I think that's led to a lot of the problems we've had in interaction between police officers and citizens. If you get back to that, police officers, a lot of them nowadays they've gone back to riding bicycles, or just walking in an urban setting. They have a neighborhood area that they walk, and so you have that. People know who they are, and they know who folks are, and I think it's
personal interaction.
Yeah, and that's something that I don't know how that would affect if somebody that had been in combat were to reintegrate and get involved in police work, whether that would help or hurt.
Again, I've seen many veterans with a variety of conditions, and I don't look at say a guy's got PTSD, shouldn't be a cop. I say the guy's got PTSD, let's see what his morphology is.
Should be maybe another layer of
Exactly.
looking at whether that's appropriate work for them.
And you never want to say that because you have a certain disability or a certain condition that you can't do something. That's not a place we want to go.
Exactly.
Okay. We're going to keep on talking. We're going to the show will fade out. We'll just keep our discussion going. And it's been Progressive Soup, and I'm David Stevenson, Paul Kachevsky, and Michael Zacchea.